The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
After a spell as a working journalist, Nick Taylor decided to become a professional writer of nonfiction, writing only on subjects that captured his interest. Happily, his range of interests is broad, and Taylor now has books on tournament fishing, bass wars, the U.S. Marshals Witness Protection Program, Sins of the Father, the life of astronaut John Glenn, and the story of Gordon Gould, inventor of the laser. His most recent is American Made, the story of Roosevelt's WPA. I spoke with Nick Taylor at Pebble Hill, the Caroline Marshall Drawn Center for the Arts and Humanities, on the campus of Auburn University.
Nick, I'm glad you had time to come in.
Don, it's my pleasure.
You've had a busy day. I know because I saw you start it with a talk this morning on travel and the importance of opportunity.
Yes. Saying yes to opportunity, even though you might be a little bit suspicious. That's how the good stories come out.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have bought a stranger a pair of Air Jordans or not, but I admired you for doing it.
Well, it turned out well. I mean, it made our foster child happy, and it made us happy when the kid who needed the Air Jordans repaid us with a beautiful conch shell.
Yeah, that is good. And how did you know in advance? How did you think in advance to have the New York Yankees hats?
Ha, that's funny. Well, we were going to Eastern Europe, and we thought that the one icon that we could easily carry was New York Yankees caps. It would say, the United States. It would say baseball. It would say kind of young, hip, American kind of thing. And we thought this is very, very soon after the fall of communism, so we thought people might embrace these things. And in fact, we found a ready market for them. A couple of Yankees caps got us across the border from Poland to Czechoslovakia when we didn't have the international insurance that we should have had. And they got a woman in Brezno, Slovakia, what is now Slovakia, to agree to take the rental car keys and return them to the rental car agency, which was closed when we got there. And we had to take this car back and go back to Poland.
It is nice what passes for currency. And that I could see how that would. It used to be packs of Marlboros, but I think it's so much healthier to be distributing Yankees caps.
Absolutely, and they're foldable. You can pack them easily.
Yeah. Well, you're a hardworking professional writer. I know you have a shelf of books. The newest book, I think the newest book is your study of the WPA, American Made.
That is, yes.
I am a devotee of Sunday morning news discussion pundit shows. And I have listened to Mr. George Will say any number of times, I'm sure I've heard him say it 6 times, that the WPA and the New Deal accomplished nothing. It was only World War II that got us out of the Depression, and that all the rest of it was just window dressing, didn't do anything. And I know that you don't think that.
I don't believe it, and it's not true. It's a trope of conservatives. They say that the only World War II ended the Depression, and that's not untrue. What happened, though, is that in 1937, Roosevelt was too encouraged by the fact that unemployment had dropped from 25 to 17%, in part because of the WPA and the Public Works Administration and other New Deal programs. So he shaved or slashed WPA funding by 2/3. It drove the nation into another recession, and after that, it took World War II to end the Depression. What George Will also doesn't understand, he doesn't look around him, and he doesn't see at places like Auburn, Alabama, where some of the university buildings were built by the WPA, and in almost every community in the United States, the WPA contributed to it substantially. And we grew up, you and I, in a world that the WPA created and needed to be created because when it started, the United States had this 19th century infrastructure that needed to be brought up to speed.
Yeah. I think my favorite infrastructure story, I'm not sure that it's in your book, is the out-of-work architects who were each assigned an overpass on the Connecticut Turnpike.
That isn't
in your book, is it?
It's not.
No,
but
you know the story I mean, though. I mean, no architects had work because
exactly.
nothing was being built.
The unemployment rate among
Yeah.
architects and engineers was like 90%.
Yeah.
They had work in New York City where Robert Moses was lashing them to produce plans that would bring WPA money into New York City. All these projects were locally generated. They weren't top-down. The government didn't say, we're going to build something here, and we're going to build a school here, and we're going to build a town hall there, or we're going to build this road. These were all locally generated projects. And, but they required engineering plans and architectural drawings, and that put a lot of architects back to work.
Could have been anything from a city park to the Hoover Dam. I mean,
Yes,
things
well,
came in every size, didn't they?
Absolutely. But the bigger projects were built by the Public Works Administration.
Yeah.
But that differed from the WPA in that you didn't have to be on relief to get a job with the Public Works Administration. The WPA, the Works Progress Administration, you had to show you were poor enough to be on relief, and then you got a job. And the other secret of the WPA was that 90% of project budgets had to be spent on labor, which assured that more people were put to work than would have been otherwise.
Right. And there's no use avoiding the subject. Should we, in today, right this red hot minute, organize federally funded works to ease unemployment?
Well, we've tried to do that with the original stimulus package in 2009, which was decried by conservatives, and I'm sure George Will was one of them. The fact of the matter is it prevented the recession that we're currently in from getting any worse. Mm-hmm. This is Keynesian economics. People like George Will don't believe in Keynesian economics. They believe in austerity. Of course, Keynesianism says that if you put money in the hands of people who will spend it, you will improve the economy. Right. And that's what the WPA did, and that's what the stimulus tried to do, and as Nobel Prize winning economists like Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman say, we should have spent more money,
right,
which would have put more money working through the wheels of the economy.
Yeah, Krugman has become a hero of mine.
I like him myself.
I'm just mad about his column and his commentaries on television. I've noticed, and anybody looking at your career would notice, that you have written books on an almost unimaginable array of subjects. The man who invented the laser beam, John Glenn, the WPA, bass fishing. Right. That's not how it's usually done. Usually somebody has a kind of specialty, you know, and I write books on education, he writes books on sports figures. What is the process, aside from large advances, by which you move from subject to subject?
Well, you could be talking to my agent, or you'd be channeling my agent. She tells me that most people specialize. You're absolutely right. I just have never been able to do that, simply because I find such a broad array of stories interesting. Mm-hmm. From bass fishing, the creation of the professional bass fishing circuit, which was my first book, called Bass Wars. And then I came upon this mafia story about this guy who had taken his family into the witness protection program, right, because he began to testify against his old mafia colleagues, including John Gotti. But the story was really the kid's story, which was they were headed toward college football scholarships, and then suddenly their identities disappeared.
Sal Jr.
Yeah, Sal
and
Jr.
his little brother.
Brother Joe.
I don't have a lot to say about bass fishing. I really don't. But I was intrigued. It's possible for big winners to take in $100,000 in a year?
Oh, more than that. Now, I had read a story in the Atlanta Constitution that said the winner of this bass fishing tournament on Lake Lanier, north of Atlanta, is going to win $100,000. That was enough to encourage me to go see what it was all about. And it was incredible, this different world, these sleek boats, these huge motors, these fishermen with, tons of rods and reels, and all their equipment and the logos on their jackets, and it was just interesting enough to encourage me to write about it. And that goes to your original question. If something is interesting enough, and I think it's going to be interesting enough to other people, and I think it's going to keep me interested for, however long it takes to write the book, a year and a half. In the case of the WPA, 7 years. Right. Then I'm going to want to tell the story.
But you stayed with those bass tournaments for the best part of a year, didn't you?
Yeah, I traveled around with these guys, and they were great. And they had philosophies of life that anybody could embrace. It just happened to be applied to fishing. And these were people who could sit down at a dinner party, and they could talk about fishing, but it wouldn't be uninteresting to you. It's just a good story.
All right. There's one character in the book who's a kind of a Zen master yoga fisherman. He thinks he has psychic powers.
I don't think he has.
What is it that how do you characterize it?
Well, his name was Rick Clunn. Rick
Yes.
Clunn won the major fishing tournament a couple of times, and he tried to visualize. I referred to him as a Zen fisherman, yes, because he just tried to immerse himself in the moment. He was a fisherman of the moment, and that really was the secret of what made him good. He didn't proselytize about being a Zen fisherman or about being mystical or anything like that. He just was, and he was a quiet guy, and some of these guys weren't quiet, and some were more flamboyant and outspoken. But this was a guy I liked simply because he was accessible in a weird kind of way.
Yeah. Well, I interviewed not long ago a writer who spent a year on the NASCAR circuit, finally writing about the teams.
Yeah.
And they turned out to be teams. The bass tournament, they're not teams, are they? Is the fisherman alone in his boat?
The fisherman is alone. Well, there are, in tournaments, major tournaments, there are 2 fishermen, or a fisherman and an observer. The idea being that if you are in the boat with a competitor, you're not going to cheat because your competitor is not going to allow you to cheat, and you're not going to allow him to cheat either. See, some of these unpoliced tournaments that this whole thing grew out of, people would import fish to Alabama from Florida, and they'd stake out this fish and then go back and get it. And if you're fishing by yourself, sometimes you could cook the books.
People could cheat at anything if you give them enough opportunity.
Well, absolutely. But this whole thing, this whole professional fishing tournament circuit was created by Ray Scott of Alabama, who was an insurance salesman who loved to go fishing, and he finally figured out that you could make stars of these people. And you could create a circuit like the PGA where people went from lake to lake and do their fishing, and you could have public weigh-ins where the fish were weighed, and then fans could react to their hero's triumphant catch of the day. And it's a huge, huge sport now.
And there's sponsorships.
Sponsorships, Evinrude, Johnson, Shimano, the various equipment manufacturers. And the money is much, much better now than it was then. And ESPN owns the network that broadcasts the Bass Angler Sportsman Society tournaments.
Oh, it's on. I see it.
It's huge. There's huge money involved.
I'm amused, or I don't know, amazed maybe is a better word. The giant outboard motors are for getting from one fishing spot to the next in the fewest number of seconds. They're huge. They're bigger than Cadillacs. They're bigger than anything.
There's probably a limit of 200 horsepower, but that'll make a bass boat go pretty fast.
Yeah, it's amazing. Your book, Sins of the Father. I've been acquainted for many years with Gates Elise and always have loved his book, Honor Thy Father, which is the mafia book. This is. Do you know the television show In Plain Sight? You watch it?
Yeah.
What do you? I mean, you're now something of an expert on witness protection. Do they get it right on that show? Is that trustworthy?
Yeah. I mean, it's the thing that's most misinterpreted or people are misinformed about the witness protection program is the extent to which the organized crime will go after former witnesses. It's really less dire. My guy, Sal Polisi, he testified against John Gotti. He exposed a crooked judge in Queens, New York.
Yeah.
And he goes out, and of course the witness protection program sends people to places where everybody is likely to see people from someplace else, which means Army-based towns. And so it's not a big secret to say that these people came or went to San Antonio, Texas, which is, of course, a hotbed of high school football, and these two boys both did.
I was curious
reestablish
about where it was.
Yeah. Sal Polisi was, as you might imagine, of any of these guys, right? They're not shrinking violets. I mean, the witness protection program would love to send their former mafia guys to someplace in the middle of America and have them become hardware salesmen at Sears.
Yeah.
But the fact is that they're not these kind of guys.
No.
They're not
that one.
Sales clerks. And so at one point, Sal Polisi had a card printed up that he handed out to people, and his card said, "Formerly Sal Polisi."
Yes. And
So-
now he's done a book. I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wrote kind of a prequel to Sins of the Father. It's called the Sinatra Club.
yeah. Here's if you were a novelist, and Sins of the Father had been a novel, what you and I might very well be discussing is the novelist's challenge to be fond of, to some degree, all of his characters.
Right.
Now, I'll tell you quite candidly, the more I learned about Crazy Sal Pazza, the less I liked him until I didn't like him at all. He was a cruel, savage, violent, amoral, horrible person. But you seem to maintain a certain fondness for him, you had to as a writer, what?
Well, he was self-interested, and he was, he was a recidivist felon, which in New York means you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life.
Right.
So if he hadn't flipped and turned government witness, he would have gone to jail for the rest of his life. Now, his redeeming moment was for his kids. And was that an excuse? Maybe. But the fact is that both these kids, and they're now in their 40s, are, productive, law-abiding, married citizens with children who live, here and there, and they're good kids. They're good people.
Yeah.
And they, in the epilogue
Yeah.
to the new edition of Sins of the Father, which just came out, I talked to them, and they confronted their father.
Yes.
And he did cruel things as a criminal, but their issue with him was that, look, you've never let us forget who we are, and now he had wanted them to be in a documentary movie without disguising them or their voices.
Right.
And they said, no, it ain't going to happen. And, he griped about this, but they were right.
Oh, yes, they were, of course. They wanted to continue to live.
Yeah, and
Normal American lives, so to speak.
his past was his life. Right. I mean, that's what he had to sell, and that's what he's still selling. Yeah. But once again, he's not a
nice man.
Actually, you'd be entertained by him. You would.
I believe it.
Yeah,
I believe it. I started your book on Gordon Gould, the man who invented the laser. I did not mean to read it. I really didn't. I thought, well,
if only Jon Stewart would make those kind of admissions.
I didn't mean to, but I did. I started in. I thought, it wasn't a whodunit. It was an odd book about a person I knew nothing about laser beams, about which I knew nothing. But I went through it because I really wanted to see how the court case was going to play out, how the patent, how patent law was going to play out, and he would finally be redeemed or he wouldn't. And I don't know that I have a question, but I will tell you that in your book, you praise Gould's lawyers for having mastered enough enough physics to present the case in court.
Right.
You not only managed to present the case, the legal case, you also presented the scientific case. I mean, I thought it was a very complicated piece of work. I could not have done it. I don't know why you did it, but you did do it.
Well, it was
Gould
just,
got a hold of you somehow, right?
It was another fascinating story,
Yeah.
and I liked Gordon Gould. I had proposed another book about another inventor. He was kind of an invention hijacker. He had a very broad patent that allowed him to say, okay, you need to pay me royalties, and he made millions upon millions of dollars doing this. But Gould was really a better story. I mean, he was a graduate student. He was kind of an older graduate student, and he came upon the formula that really created a laser, and he knew from the very beginning, from his first notebook, what it was going to be and what it could do. And then, but there was a Nobel Prize, or not then a Nobel Prize winning scientist who was at Columbia at the town, Robert Towns.
Yeah.
Charles Towns, I'm sorry. And he patented the first laser, he and his brother-in-law working at Bell Labs. And he got the credit. And he got the Nobel Prize, and his brother-in-law also got a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
But Gould had to convince a jury, a series of juries actually, and a series of patent examiners.
How long did it take? 25 years?
30 years.
30 years, oh my
30
God.
years, and he bargained away, in order to keep this fight up to
Right.
his lawyers, he bargained away 80% of the future income that he was going to make from licensing the laser. But he ended up with 3 significant laser patents, because the system fought him so hard, by the time he got his patents, the laser was a fully developed industry. And so he was making much, much more money than he would have made otherwise with these fundamental laser patents. 17 years, he was making, I don't know, $5 million a year.
Oh, I'm sure.
And,
Finally.
but he was vindicated, and he was an interesting guy, and he liked a martini, which made me like him.
Yes. And he sailed.
And he sailed,
Which
exactly.
made you like him also.
Yeah, indeed.
A book that I had I thought there was no mystery about why you wrote it, about how it unfolded, is the book about the last years of your parents' lives. That's a nice little book. I mean, it's a warm little book, and it's sort of I won't say, well, should I say it's a kind of a warning, that is, here's some things that can happen, here's some things that can go wrong.
Well, what happens is, I had begun to think about my parents getting older, and I think it was perhaps because they lived in Mexico.
Yeah.
And so I was not immediately able to access them or be with them, and I'm an only child. But I'm at the kind of spearhead of the cutting edge of the baby boom generation. I was actually born toward the end of 1945, so I'm not technically a baby boomer. But, this is a generational story. And what we want to do is avoid thinking about the fact that we're going to have to take care of our parents. And what are we going to do, and how do we prepare not only ourselves, but them? And of course, as we get older, we also deny that time exists. So you put off decisions. And I thought that by writing, my parents were pretty clear-eyed about this, my mother especially. And she had a list of things that she knew that she and my father needed to do, and to let me know and to let me in on. But I just thought it was a generational story, and and that's what it became. And I love that book. It's a sweet little
I
book.
did too. It's a sweet book, and it goes along for a while with you, you are a character in that book.
Yeah.
And you are trying to do the right thing, and they're too stubborn to agree. And then they seem to know what to do, and it doesn't work out, and you're distracted. Actually, in that book, I learned that your first book was the best book, because that's the book that you were working on while you were trying to deal with your parents. And they were restless. They were a nomadic couple, weren't they?
Well, they were bohemian. My father had been a land surveyor in his life, and my mother was a newspaper reporter. And they didn't have, we never had any money to speak of.
Right.
And so when it came time for them to, land surveyors can't be land surveyors forever. It's physical work. And they liked Mexico. My father was a student of pre-Columbian history, and so they moved to Mexico.
Right. And it fit their budget.
Yeah, and it fit their budget. And then they moved back, and they lived in a couple of retirement high-rises, one in Florida, one in North Carolina. And they didn't like that because you couldn't have cats. So they moved back to Mexico. And, of course, as any child of older parents knows, it probably is going to take a precipitating event before you can really start the track toward taking care of things.
Yeah.
And the precipitating event in my case was that my father had collapsed in a restaurant and ultimately had to have a pacemaker implanted at a hospital in Guadalajara, and my mother was beginning to suffer from dementia, so we had to bring them back at that point.
Yeah, it's a kind of melancholy story, and yet it's so, if it's not universal, it is certainly widespread and general.
Well, the end, I think, says that we took care of them, my wife and I, as best we could, but we had to take care of ourselves as well. And
Yes.
it's always that balance, that tension between, what you need to do for your own life and your own career and your own kids and your parents as well. I mean, you're trying to keep the lids on a lot of jars, and it's hard to do.
Right. Well, you wrote a book about someone no one knew about, Gordon Gould. You also, we only have 10 seconds, no joke. You also have written a book about John Glenn, about a man that everybody thinks they know everything about. In a sentence or two, tell me, a person should read the John Glenn book because he will learn what?
Well,
that he maybe didn't know.
You'll learn that he's very brave, courageous, he's a patriot, and you also already know about John Glenn is that he's a thoroughly decent person. He's a fine human being. He's fun to talk to. He's engaging. He's generous. And he's just a true American.
That's great. Well, I'm going to take the John Glenn as the balance for Sal Polisi and say thank you very much, Dick.
The scales of justice even out.
This has been a pleasure.
It
Thank
has
you for
indeed.
coming in.
My pleasure.
To order this season of Bookmark on DVD, call 1-800-463-8825. Additional information can be found on our website at www.alabamatv.org.